Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today. It is Monday morning and I'm joined by Niall Stanage. Nice to see you, Niall. I hear you had a long journey over the weekend.
I had an arduous journey during my fatherly duties. I was moving stuff for my daughter from Charlotte to New York City. So that was a 10-hour drive in a moving truck. What more fun could you have on a weekend?
Good man, good man.
How was your weekend?
It was just fine, yeah. Happy summer weekend, enjoying some nice weather. It was intensely hot yesterday, but yeah, good weekend.
Well, we should get down to business, I suppose, Robbie. So what is on your radar?
I suppose we shall. Well, the historic peace summit between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin took place this weekend in Alaska, with the two nations coming somewhat closer to achieving a lasting peace in Ukraine. Now, those who had hoped this meeting would result in an immediate end to the conflict were left disappointed. However, top U.S. diplomat and negotiator Steve Witkoff said that Putin had agreed the Ukraine would receive a NATO-esque protection guarantee, which would protect Ukraine from further Russian aggression after the war. Now, that's a key component, obviously, of any peace agreement. Ukraine can't simply agree to lose some territory now if it remains the case that Russia will resume the attack later or at some future date. But on the Ukrainian front, it's unfortunately the case that President Zelensky will likely have to agree to territorial concessions in order to bring this conflict to an end. There's a dawning realization among even the most staunchly pro-Ukraine commentators that the war simply will not end unless Ukraine agrees to let Russia keep the conquered territories. The alternative is a drawn-out conflict that kills thousands more Ukrainians and results in the entire country coming under Russian control. The skillful diplomacy of Trump, of Witkoff, and of Secretary of State Marco Rubio is designed to avoid that outcome. Indeed, Rubio's done a terrific job this weekend of schooling the reflexively hawkish voices in the mainstream media who think any public display of respect toward Putin is somehow emboldening him in the Russian takeover of Ukraine. Media pundit after media pundit complained endlessly about Putin receiving the red carpet treatment, riding in a fancy car with Trump, being treated with decency as befits his station as an important world leader. In fact, popular liberal ex-personality Brian Krasenstein called on the U.S. government to assassinate Putin as soon as he set foot in Alaska, which is obviously an insane idea. I don't think I have to point that out. By comparison, the mainstream media was a bit more restrained than that. They were still quite furious that Trump was being nice to Putin. Look, being mean to Putin was going to work, then Joe Biden would have already succeeded at ending the war. He didn't, because diplomacy is a bit more complicated and subtle than just screaming Putin bad at the top of your lungs over and over again. Rubio made this point expertly during his conversation with ABC's Martha Raddatz. Let's watch.
Critics of President Trump will say the pomp and circumstance, the red carpet, the warm handshake, that President Trump simply lost that Putin gained there just by being on the world stage and walking down a red carpet with the president. Your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, critics of President Trump are always going to find something to criticize. You don't even pay attention to it anymore. But I will tell you this. Putin is already on the world stage. He's already on the world stage. The guy's conducting a full-scale war in Ukraine.
And then here's a bit more from that clip.
He's already on the world stage. When I hear people say that, oh, it elevates him. Well, all we do is talk about Putin all the time. All the media's done is talk about Putin all the time for the last 4 or 5 years. That doesn't mean he's right about the war. That doesn't mean he's justified about the war. Put all that aside. It means you're not going to have a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. You're not going to end a war between Russia and Ukraine without dealing with Putin.
Rubio has it exactly right. We can't end this war by refusing to give Putin attention or the spotlight or whatever it was Raddatz was complaining about there. Frankly, the argument she's making sounded to me like she was calling for, deplatforming Putin, like she's saying he should be kicked off Twitter or something. We shouldn't be surprised to hear a mainstream media personality, of course, returning to this very familiar well. Liberal and progressive media personalities love the idea of deplatforming people because they have an almost religious faith in censorship and silencing. These are the preferred tactics of the mainstream media folks who imagine that if they can't hear or see people and opinions they don't like, must mean those sinister forces have been defeated or swept aside. You'd think they might have learned by now that this tactic usually backfires, and in any case, Putin is not an account that can be suspended or an idea that can be banned or a phenomenon that can be ignored. Or a military power that can be defeated. He's a political figure who must be engaged with. And lest anyone think the meeting was nothing but pleasantries, President Trump gave Putin a letter from the First Lady, Melania Trump, asking him to end the war for the sake of the children who are suffering because of it. Mr. Putin, she wrote, you can single-handedly restore their melodic laughter. Now let us all hope and pray that this meeting is followed by further diplomacy that ends this horrific conflict. And we'll be talking later in the show about the Zelensky component of all this. But there were a number of media interviews Marco Rubio did over the weekend where he faced basically a version of that question. You know, aren't we like normalizing Putin or something by shaking his hand? I mean, what good would it do to invite him here and be insulting to him? How would that help end the war? So I was very perplexed by that, because this was a media obsession over the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I've a bit of a different view, as I think I do, of the conflict writ large. I mean, I take some of the points you made, and the Brian Krasenstein idea is absolutely nuts. That
World War III on
just have snipers on the rooftops and take him out as soon as he walks off the plane. I mean, that's like a ludicrous idea. Yeah. I think that the situation in Ukraine is genuinely complicated and difficult, because I think perhaps a little bit more than you take the argument that you can't just embolden Putin or have no deterrent to him doing this kind of thing in the future, whether it's in Ukraine or elsewhere in Eastern Europe. To my mind, the Alaska summit was one where Putin accomplished more of his aims or got more of his desires than the United States did, because there was no immediate ceasefire, and whatever about smiling or red carpets or whatever, it did, I think, reduce the isolation of Russia. I don't think it's necessarily about platforming or deplatforming. It's about having this meeting where he is welcomed on equal footing, as if we're just having a kind of casual discussion rather than a man who has invaded a neighbouring sovereign nation and thus instigated a war that has now lasted more than 3 years.
Yeah, I just don't know that the isolation, though, if I thought isolation was going to bring the war to a close, then I would support, playing hardball to a greater degree. And Trump has countenanced playing hardball to some degree. He's been frustrated with Putin. He's threatened sanctions, but of course previous sanctions have done nothing. A greater form of isolation has not deterred Putin from continuing this conflict. So then I think we have to consider the possibility, and I was very happy to hear Witkoff say that apparently some kind of security guarantee, not NATO, but a security guarantee for the rest of Ukraine is on the table. I mean, that's the best deal they're going to get. Is it not? I can't imagine a more favorable situation for Ukraine than what is still under Ukrainian hands remains Ukraine, and there is an understanding that Russia could not invade again because it is now under the protection of, it's not actually NATO, but under the protection of Europe or us. I don't see that is a good deal, because they're not at risk of further invasion. I can't imagine anything better than that coming about from this.
If it is a deal, if those security guarantees are ironclad and dependable,
right,
the question is really to what extent or with what specificity will those security guarantees be offered? Because as you just alluded to, obviously the nightmare scenario for Ukraine is they make a deal, they concede some kind of territory, and then Russia just comes back in a year, 18 months or 2 years and storms back in again. So that's why it's very important to have these guarantees. Let's see how the meeting today goes, because I think there's going to be a lot of concern and scrutiny as to whether the pendulum swings back to a fairer direction.
And I hope those security guarantees really bring Europe into the picture for being responsible for Ukraine's defense or protection, not getting the U.S. more involved in this region. I don't really think that's something the American people want very much, but we will discuss the Zelensky and Ukrainian component of this in a bit.
We certainly will. Meanwhile, did the State Department just change an international policy based on Laura Loomer? We'll discuss that next. Stay with us.